of a monthly series of classes shiurim on Agadata, Talmudic narrative, sponsored by and through Project Makom, Project of Jew in the City. Project Makom is a organization or social group that aims to connect and provide an opportunity for people who have grown up or been raised in communities, ultra religious communities, other communities, and they are looking for another fit religiously in the Orthodox community. And so what we are doing here is to provide a window into perhaps a different way of learning Gemara, Talmud than some folks have learned before in their yeshivas. Just a very quick background about myself. I grew up Lubavitch, Hasidic, in Palo Alto, California. Eventually went to Skokie Yeshiva in Chicago, which is a traditional Orthodox yeshiva, and learned Gemara there. Went to Israel for a year, and then came back, did my studies undergraduate at Columbia in medieval history, medieval Jewish history, and eventually after that went to learn in Kollel for 2 years in Israel, came back and got a master's degree in ancient Judaism, Talmud, from Yale, and now I'm a practicing lawyer, a litigator, do constitutional litigation. So my background combines traditional Gemara learning, Talmudic learning, academics, historical background, and also a literary approach. So I hope that's interesting and perhaps unusual for some people. Since this is the first class, I wanted to frame what I'm trying to accomplish here and a little bit about my approach to Talmud and my view of it before we get into the class itself. And each class, each month, I'm going to pick a story, a particular story, or a sugya, a section of the Talmud that deals with some sort of narrative, historical story, or a story about a rabbi, a legend of some kind, and delve into that, try to attack it from a creative and new angle. I think there are really three things that I want to accomplish with this class. One is to show, the thing that speaks to me about learning Gemara, learning Talmud, learning Agadata, is that when I learn these stories, when I read these stories, I see within the traditional texts, Gemara, Talmud was put down on paper approximately 1,500 years ago, and I see in those ancient texts a kind of Judaism, a kind of religious practice that speaks to me, that's open, questioning, thinking, challenging, humorous, that places ethics and morality at the forefront of what it means to be a spiritual person. And that's the Gemara that I fell in love with and that I still connect with. And I think, unfortunately, some people either have gone through yeshiva education and the focus has been solely and completely on the legalistic aspects of Talmud and of Jewish thought, and at the expense of large portions of what is kind of our foundational text other than the Torah itself. But those are kind of skipped over, or at least not taken very seriously, and seen as sort of an appendage of lesser value to the legalistic materials. And while the legalistic sections are important and there's a certain analytical rigor to them that is exciting and challenging, I think to read them without the Agadic portions is kind of like to read law codes without reading cases, or let alone stories about how people who are affected by and live through the law. And so you kind of get a stunted and to some extent technical and non directly humanistic approach or view of the way that that the Gemara and traditional Judaism sees Jewish practice. And so I'd like to open up to people some of these texts that perhaps they haven't focused on, in a way of looking at them also, not just the existence of the texts, but an approach to them that puts them at the forefront, that sees in these texts not the kind of lesser stepchild of the rigorous analytical legal sources, but that actually sees in them the opportunity and the opening to understand the way the rabbis saw and looked at the world, at human interactions, at their relationship with God, and that in doing so allows us to access a kind of authentic traditional Judaism that speaks to us as modern people. Number two, I want to, and part of the project for me is to kind of reclaim the Gemara itself, the Talmud itself, is something that I love to learn, and that I find to be a dynamic, humorous, exciting text, and to sort of bring that out, because I think for the same reasons that people see or don't see in the Gemara a kind of Judaism that speaks to them sometimes on a human level, they also don't find any, or they aren't interested in, cannot compelled to study the Gemara, the Talmud. And I think that's a shame. I mean, as I said before, other than the Torah itself, the 5 books of Moses, the Talmud is really the foundational text of Judaism, of every kind of Judaism that postdates it. And within it is a vast storehouse of knowledge, of information, of cultural recordings, of religious practices, and it's multifaceted, it's dynamic, it's multivocal, and it speaks to me, to the human condition in its all complexity, to the complicated questions that we ask about the human condition, about our interactions with one another, about love, forgiveness, about spirituality, and it grapples with those things in a complicated way, questions, challenges. And so I would like to, in doing these readings of the Talmudic narratives, open up the Talmudic texts to some people who haven't either had access to them, or their access to them has not inspired them to continue to learn. And number three, I think it's important and potentially transformational to kind of use these texts to access and grapple with issues that are difficult to deal with head on. So, literature itself is important and can provide an avenue. When people read a story, they read about the characters, they see themselves in the characters, and they start to think about the way that those characters deal with different issues, with love, with loss, family, friendship. And so if they're grappling with those things themselves, if we are grappling with those things ourselves, we see those characters, and it allows us to kind of think about those issues with one level of remove, in a way that that to just think about them and deal with them directly is sometimes too painful, too difficult, too challenging. So I hope that in studying these texts, I'm going to try to choose selections, stories that have a certain value in that way, that I think are grappling with issues that we as human beings grapple with, and to read them in a way that allows us to to think about and grapple with those issues ourselves in our own lives, in a way that perhaps if we were just do it directly without kind of being reflected through the characters in the story, we would have a harder time seeing things in a new light, in a different light, from a different direction. One final caveat before I go into the story for the evening, and probably people in the audience are of various backgrounds in terms of the amount of learning that they've done, the amount of Talmud study that they've done, from nothing at all to having learned in yeshivas their whole lives. So I'm going to try to present the text in a way that is understandable and accessible to everybody, but I hope also in a new light, that even if you've learned some of these materials before, you'll get something new out of it. And my approach really is a close read, as you'll see, to really pick the story apart word for word, under the assumption, and it's assumption that's borne out to me in studying these materials time and again, that there's some value. In fact, that there's a real, just like a great piece of literature, the more you dig in and the closer and more carefully you read the story, the layers get unpeeled, and you can see connections between this one story you're looking at and other stories or parts of the story, metaphors, images, character development, and that it's done in a very complicated and sophisticated way. So I'm going to try to uncover that, but to do that really requires a clean read, to look at the text with new, fresh eyes, and not to import too much of the way that the text has been read previously. And if you wanted just to know what has been said about something before, then you don't really need this class. You don't really hear from me. So that sometimes raises some hackles, I have to admit, because people will ask, where is that interpretation from, or is that in some traditional source? And I'll be frank and say that most of the time, or much of the time, it's not, because I wouldn't be giving the interpretation I was giving if that was the traditional read. So, so what I would say is that in doing that clean read, we'll see where it takes us, and have an open mind about what we're gonna find out. Okay, so the sources that we're going to use and stuff that it's just two things. Like I said, I like to sort of keep it simple, read the materials fresh. So we're going to use the Masechet Ta'anit, Gemara Tainus, the third parak, Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, 20a. And then at some point, I'm going to also go into the parallel story in the Chumash Parshat Balak, the portion of Balak, which is the 22nd parak in the book of Bamidbar. So if you got those materials at home, you can take them out and find the page and follow along. If not, it's not necessary. I will read what it is that we'll be studying as we're studying it. So if you don't have those materials in front of you, that's fine. But if you do, again, it's Masechet Ta'anit, Tractate Ta'anit in the Talmud Bavli, and Parshat Balak in Chumash Bamidbar, in the book of Bamidbar, in the 5 books of Moses. Okay, so we're going to start. It's about halfway down the page, Chaf Amud Aleph, 20a, about 3, 6, 9 or 10 lines after the lines widen. And it starts V'chein ir shelo yardu aleha geshamim. So the Mishnah here, and for those who don't know, the way that the Talmud is arranged is that it's a commentary on the Mishnah, which was an earlier code that was written down around 200 Common Era, or in the 2nd century, I guess I should say, in the Common Era. And the commentary of the Talmud, which is what we're going to focus on, is then interspersed with the Mishnah that it comments on. So there's a section of the Mishnah. This is Masechet Tani. It deals with fasts and situations where there's a drought and the various things that the rabbis would do, the practices when there was a drought. And one of the things that it talks about in this Mishnah that we are going to be jumping off from is that a city which rain hasn't fallen on it, various laws that relate to that and what you should do there. So the Gemara says, the Gemara is going to read the Mishnah non-literally. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Ushtein Laklala. That this is a curse not only on the city that rain fell on it, but also on that rain didn't fall on it, but also on the city that rain did fall on it. That doesn't really matter for what we're going to be doing, so I'm not going to really focus on that. What we are going to start from, though, and the reason I started with that line is that the Gemara, the story here, jumps off from the notion of a kind of non-literal or a counter reading of a text, and goes on for a series of other verses, psukim, that are read against their literal meaning. And I should also say that the reason I picked this, or one of the reasons I picked this section, is because now we're in the period of consolation, Shevat and Nechemta, 7 weeks of consolation that follow Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, and that when there's a notion that after the period of mourning for the destruction of the temple and Jerusalem and the loss of Jewish sovereignty that are memorialized on the 9th of Av, that we are now in a period that we are consoled by the idea or the promise that there will eventually be a return to Jerusalem and an end to the exile, Jewish 2,000-year exile. And so this section, although it's going to go in very different places, starts from, and I'm going to try to return at the end to, the notion of reconciliation and of Tisha B'Av. So the Gemara here says, Haisa Yerushalayim Lenida B'neihem. So Eicha, the book of mourning that we read, mourning about the destruction of Jerusalem, that we read on Tisha B'Av, has a verse, Jerusalem will be a nida, a menstruating woman. And the literal reading of this, the literal meaning of this, is that just as when a woman is a nida in traditional Jewish practice, the husband and wife are separated from one another, so too Jerusalem has become a nida, separated woman from the Jewish people who are out in exile. So it's a metaphor and personifies Jerusalem as a woman separated from her husband. And so the Gemara rereads it, though, as a blessing, or at least with a positive spin. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav Lebracha. So Rabbi Yehuda, in the name of Rav, says, no, this verse that Jerusalem is like a menstruating woman is actually a bracha, is actually a blessing. Why? Kinida. Because the verse in Eicha says like a nida, but ma nida yesh laheter, just like a woman, although she's separated, will eventually be returned to her husband. Af Yerushalayim yesh la takana. So too Jerusalem will have a reconciliation, a rebuilding. So in the verses of sorrow, the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda Amar, in the name of Rav, sees the possibility of reconciliation. The separation hints to an eventual return. Haisa ka'almana. There's another verse in Eicha that reads that she will be Jerusalem again like a widow. So again, the personification of Jerusalem as a widow this time, someone who's lost their husband. That seems even more negative and permanent than Anita. But again, Rabbi Yehuda reads it lebracha as a positive, ke almana, because the verse says like a widow, lo almana mamash, but not an actual widow. Elak isha shehalach ba'alam nisayam, but like a woman whose husband has gone off on a distant journey, but da'ato lachzor aleha. But his intention is to eventually return to her. So similar to the Nida verse, the Gemara here rereads a verse which seems on its face entirely negative, that Jerusalem will be like a widow. It seems entirely permanent, but it reads in that letter, ke, like a widow, the possibility and the promise of return, that it's only like a widow, but unlike a widow where the separation is permanent. This one is like a couple where one is traveling in the distant seas, eventually is going to come back. So what I like about this set of readings is that not only does it see the promise of consolation, but in the verses itself of sorrow, it sees the hint of the reconciliation. They're almost inherent in the separation is the promise of return. Okay, there's another verse that it reads from Eicha. I'm going to skip that over because we sort of got the point of those. And now we're going to launch into a related but not directly on point topic. And I want to say, just because folks may have varying, like I said, levels of experience here. The Gemara, one of the things I really like about it is that it reads like a sort of stream of consciousness in a certain sense. The connections between one section and another a lot of times are pretty tenuous. One person's name is mentioned as giving over a certain teaching, and then they'll say another teaching of that person and launch into a whole different discussion. Or there's a discussion about one topic, and then at the end of that, there's a verse, and that verse deals with the topic, but deals with another topic, and that launches you off. But what's cool, and what I like to sometimes focus on, is the way that those things seem unintentional or seem almost random at times. But a lot of times when you trace the themes through, there's actually something happening between those loosely related sections that tells a whole story. So this is what we're going to try to do here. And what kind of makes the reading that I'm going to do part of the originality and creativity of it is not to focus just on the story, but to focus on the kind of framing sections that seem on a simple read to be unconnected in any significant way, to be connected only by the teaching of the same person's name and other kinds of things like that, and to show that the entire thing is actually sort of concentric circles of meaning that eventually we will return to. So our first section was the rereading of those two verses from Eicha, from the Book of Mourning. Now we're going to have another verse that's read positively, even though it seems to be negative. And then the third section is going to be the primary story that we're going to be reading. So that second section, again, we're on Masechet Tanit, Tractate Tanit, Chaf Amud Aleph 20a. If you've got a source at home, if you've got a Gemara at home, or you can actually look up and get Masechet Tanit online as well, either in the Aramaic or in an English translation. I believe the Encino is almost fully online, and they have Masechet Tanit. So if you want to look it up there, that works as well. And you can follow along. The Encino is in English, and you can follow along on the English where we are, if that's something that's appealing to you. Okay, so this next section, like I said, the bridge section between those rereading the two verses from Eicha and then what's going to be our primary story is V'hika Hashem es Yisrael ka'asher yanud hakanem b'mayim. And Hashem, God, will strike Israel like a reed shaken in water. So this, on its face, seems to be a negative thing. God's going to strike Israel. Amar Yehuda Amarav, but the same Rabbi Yehuda Amarav who's read those three verses previously positively, he says, Lebracha, this too is a positive. How is the striking Israel, God striking Israel, going to be positive? It's Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonasan, because my dechsiv ne'emanim pitze ohev, like it says, the wounds of the one who love you are trustworthy, and deceitful are the kisses of your enemy. So this verse suggests that when you get stricken by someone you love, hurt by somebody you love, that's better than being kissed by somebody you hate. And I mean, it's kind of an interesting idea, and it's going to be the thread is going to be kind of explored a little bit more. But on just a surface reading, there's a sort of suggestion that of a kind of a false love or a false, false kisses from the hateful person, and that as much as there's a certain pain to having a relationship with somebody who you love and who is going to be forthright with you and sometimes tell you hurtful things, that relationship, which is a real relationship, which is a painful but true relationship, is still better than one that's kisses of hate or kisses from the one who secretly hates you. But the point that the Gemara wants to make is Tova Kala Shekila Achia Hashiloni Es Yisrael. So better is the curse that Achia Hashiloni cursed Israel. Yoser mi bracha sher berchan Bilam Arasha. Better than, more than the bracha that Bilam Arasha gave the Jews. So Achia Hashiloni gave a curse to Israel, and the Gemara is saying that curse is better than the bracha, the blessing that that Bilam, who was a prophet who tried to curse Israel, but then eventually sort of was forced to bless Israel instead, so that the curse was better than his blessing. And that follows or is in line with what we've been saying, that there's a certain positivity to God striking Israel, because that striking of God by Israel at least is a strike of someone who loves them. So Achia Hashiloni, why? Achia Hashiloni kilulan bekane, because Achila Hashiloni cursed them with a reed. Amar Lam Yisrael, he said, V'hika Hashem es Yisrael kasher yanud hakana, that Hashem will strike Israel like the waving of a reed. So ma kana zeh ome b'makom mayim. So just like this reed stands in a place of water, and it has strong roots. I'm going to skip a little bit. It has strong roots, and all the winds of the world will blow it, but it won't move from its place. Rather, when the wind stops, demamo ruach amad hakana b'mkomo, then the reed returns to its place. So there's being like a reed is like being like something that, as much as it gets stricken down, as much as it gets hit, as much as it gets hurt, eventually it will pop back up again. And of course, the comparison to Israel, or the suggestion that is the quality of Israel, and that, as we said from the verses in Eicha, that the Israel will eventually return and be united with Yerushalayim, is manifest. The notion is that, yes, Israel suffered, and the Gemara is suggesting here, yes, Israel has suffered, Jews have suffered for all these long years in exile, like the reed that gets beaten down day by day by the wind. But eventually, the beauty of the reed is that it has the flexibility and the strength at a level of roots, a rootedness, that it will not be uprooted. It will eventually bounce back. And that's the Jewish people. After every trial and tribulation, our rootedness is such that we bounce back again. And the suggestion is that, eventually, and, just like the Nida, as I said before, is returned to the husband, so to Israel, despite all the trials and tribulations, all the difficulties and the harrowing circumstances, will pop back up again. But Aval Bilam Arasha, but Bilam Beirachtem Be'erez, blessed them with a cedar. right? What is a cedar? A cedar is a strong, powerful tree, stands tall. Because Bilam, when he eventually blessed Israel, said that they would be like cedars on the banks of the water. So the cedar is not used to or doesn't generally grow in water, and its roots are not as sunk down as the reeds were. Again, skipping a little bit. And if all the winds in the world blow it, it doesn't move from its place, right? The reed, the smallest wind, it's going to start to shake and start to move, but again, eventually pop back. But a cedar is so strong, is so solid that all the winds in the world can't move it. But kevan shenashba ruach dromis. But if the southern wind, so in Israel, the cedars were such that the winds would blow. And I wouldn't know this off the top of my head, but I looked it up in the Koran edition of the Talmud, which is a great edition that has these kinds of natural history biographical notes on the sides, that the winds blew east to west in Israel, but occasionally there's a strong storm that blows from the south. Okarto v'hofachto al panav. Then the cedar falls on its side. It gets completely uprooted. So the cedar has the appearance, unlike the reed, the cedar has the appearance of unbending strength. It has the appearance of, and in fact, when the winds blow, it doesn't move at all, unlike the reed. But also, unlike the reed, it can eventually be toppled. And when it gets toppled, it doesn't come back again. And so there's a kind of valorization of the Jewish people, Bnei Yisrael, as the reed. And that's the bracha of the curse of the sort of being stricken like a reed, is that no matter, although, we blow and shift and move, and the winds take us one way or the other, eventually we're going to pop back up again. Velo od, and the Gemara adds, and not only that, being like a reed is good too, because Ela Shazaka Kane Lito Hemeno Kulmos Lichto Bosefer Torah Nevi'im L'Ksumim. It's also good because the reed is something that's used to make a quill, to make Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. Seems like an afterthought, sort of like reeds are good because of that power to return. And also it's kind of nice that, hey, reeds also you make Sefer Torah with. So that seems like not a bad thing too, but not too much meaning is given to that. Now we're going to get into the main story, and we'll see that at the end we return to the themes of Israel, or being like a reed and not like an erez, and what that means to write a Sefer Torah with a reed, with an instrument that has those qualities. And we'll see that by the end, that's injected with great significance and power. Okay, so now again we're on Masechet Tanit, Chaf Amud Aleph 20a, very near the bottom, 2-3 lines from the bottom, and this is our main story. And we're going to run through it pretty quickly, and then kind of pull back and try to delve into it in a little bit more detail. So the Gemara says, Tanu Rabbana, the rabbis taught, La'olam yehei adam rach kanev al yehei kasha ke'erez. A person should be soft, supple like a reed, and not hard, inflexible like a cedar. And so you see a sort of obviously connection to the previous section, but a transition in a certain way, because in the previous section it was comparing Bnei Yisrael, the Jewish people, and their kind of historical circumstance to the reed and not the cedar. And here it's saying an individual, an Adam, should be like a reed and not like a cedar. Why? So we'll find out. So there was a certain Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, who was going from a place called Migdal Gador, from the house of his Rav, his own Rabbi. And Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon wasn't just some Rabbi, he was actually the son of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who was one of the greatest of the early Tanaim, with many famous stories about him, and including that he went into a cave with his son, Rabbi Elazar, where they stayed for many years learning Torah day and night, buried up to their necks in the sand, so that they could have their clothing be preserved and they would still maintain their modesty. And so Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon is really from a dynastic family. I mean, he has yichus as no one else did in those days. He has a lineage like no one else could claim. And so he's going from the house of his Rebbe, right? He was just spending his time learning. He was riding on a donkey. They were going on the river banks. He was exceedingly happy. Why is he exceedingly happy? And he was very proud of himself. His mind was expanded about himself, means literally, but he thought he was doing pretty well for himself. Because he had learned a lot of Torah. And so the setup here is that you have one of the great rabbis, or one of the rabbis from a great lineage, who's returning from the house of study, from studying with his own rabbi, and he's feeling pretty good about himself because he's learned so much Torah. And we will see what happens to him with that. But I did want to point out one little note before we move on. So this Rabbi Shimon, the Gemara points out Rachov ala Chamor. He was riding on a donkey. And it seems like a sort of unimportant detail. But if you think about who we were just talking about in the previous section, which, as I said, seems only loosely connected, who was it who gave the blessing that was worse than a curse? Bilam. And if you remember the story of Bilam, or if you know the story of Bilam from the Chumash, Parshat Balak, Bilam too was riding on a donkey. But who rochev al osno? And so we'll see this kind of interesting connection that the same person who we're saying is gave the blessing of the eras of the cedar that you should not be like, is now being compared to this rabbi. And we'll see that connection is far more than coincidental, but I just want to plant that seed. So Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon is riding along the riverbank on a donkey, and Bilam, as he started out on his journey, was before his important moment, was also riding on a donkey. Okay, now we're on Chaf Amud Beis at the top. Nizdamein lo Adam Echad Shahaya Mechor B'Yoser. He happened upon, or Elazar bar Shimon happened upon a person, a certain unidentified man that was extremely ugly. Okay, so you have Elazar bar Shimon sitting high on his donkey with all his Torah learning and all his great accomplishments, and he happens upon this extremely ugly individual. Amar lo, so the ugly guy says to him, Shalom alecha, Rebbe. Welcome. How are you? Nice to see you, Rebbe. And he calls him with a honorific, my rabbi. V'lo hechzir lo, but Elazar bar Shimon doesn't say anything back to him. Amar lo, he doesn't return. I should say he doesn't return the Shalom alecha, right? The hello. Instead, he says, Reika. Instead, Elazar bar Shimon says, Reika, worthless one. Kam mechor ata ha'ish. How ugly you are. Shema kol b'nei ircha mechorim b'kamocha. Is everybody in your town as ugly as you are? Are you just from Ugly Town? And I have to say, as I said at the beginning, you can't read this kind of straight. You have to understand. If you do, it's like listening to a Seinfeld, stand-up act and not realizing it's comedy. Like, of course, the Gemara understands that what it's presenting is a sort of absurd situation and an absurd interaction. It knows that, and it wants us to know that too. So we have to read it like that. So he says to him, again, are you ugly from Ugly Town? So Amar lo. So the ugly guy responds to him, Eini yodea. I don't know what's with the other townsfolk. Ella leich, but I can tell you one thing. Ella leich ve'emor uman sha'asani. Go tell them the craftsman who made me, kama mechor kli zeh she'asisa, how ugly the vessel that you made is, right? So this guy gives it right back to him. He sees this great rabbi who's sitting pretty in his all his Torah learning, and he says, you know, you're going to say that to me, go say that to the one who made me, right? Go tell God how ugly you think the thing that he made is. That's pretty powerful retort right there. So Kevan Shiyada Ba'asmo Shechet, or Elazar bar Shimon immediately realizes, you know, that, oh my gosh, I can't believe I said that to him. You know, how terrible, how disgusting that was of me. Is immediately he realizes that he sinned. Yarad min hachamor, he gets down off the donkey, and of course the positioning is not unimportant or incidental. He was riding high on the donkey, looking down at the ugly man walking on foot, right? And that was really their positioning in terms of Rabbi Elazar's mind, the way he was thinking about himself and that man. As soon as he realizes he sins, he gets off the donkey, gets down off the donkey, he prostrates himself in front of the ugly man. Right now the positioning is reversed. Rabbi Elazar has put himself down on the ground below the ugly man, realizing he sinned. Amar lo ne'esilach, I've sinned. Mecholi, forgive me. Okay, so I'm going to pause there for a second. So at this point in the story, you know, what is the story about? What's the lesson of the story? So if you remember the setup, it said, don't be supple like a reed, and don't be hard, harsh, inflexible like a cedar. So now you've got the story of Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, who seems to be a pretty hard man, or at least he's interacting in a harsh way with this person he meets in his way. And the lesson seems to be, you would think, is kind of don't be like a Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon. And do be like, doesn't say who. You know, what's rak kakane, what's supple like a reed, just kind of the opposite of Rabbi Shimon. And, you know, I think that's an important lesson in its own right. I mean, the interaction here, even if you stop the story right there, it's a pretty powerful story, you know, that you have this rabbi who, you know, has all the political power, has all of the honor from Torah learning and from his stature, and, you know, he lets that get to his head. I mean, you know, very literally, you know, and because of that, he forgets how to interact, how he should be talking to a person who he meets on the road, right? There are just two travelers on the road. The one man says to him, Shalom Alecha Rebbe, you know, hey, how are you? Nice to see you on this lonely road out here. Nice to see another traveler. Nice to meet somebody. He sees that he's a person of honor and stature, and he you know, acknowledges that. But Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon doesn't even respond. Lo hechzir lo. He doesn't even deign to say anything back to him, other than to just insult him to his face, insult the people he, you know, his townsfolk, the people he lives with, his neighbors, his community, and, you know, that moment when the ugly man responds is, you know, a powerful moment, but it's also it also tells us something, or is a lesson about the, you know, speaking truth to power. I mean, again, very literally, you know, here's this guy who's nobody, who's just walking on the road, and he sees this injustice. He's, you know, spoken to in this way. He realizes this is not right, and he speaks up. He speaks back, and by doing that, because he points out what is so wrong with what Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon does, what is not only so wrong on a sort of abstract level, but on in Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon's own framework, his own conception. You know, he sees himself as a man of God, and here he has insulted a thing made by God, and that is this epiphanal moment for him. So you stop right there. I think it's a pretty powerful story, but you know, we won't stop right there, because there's more. So I wanted to delve into and elaborate a little bit on the Bilam connection before we finish the story and sort of see where it goes. So as I said before, Bilam was riding on a donkey, or Elazar bar Shimon was riding on a donkey. I mean, it's kind of a funny comparison in a certain way, because here you're comparing one of the, a great rabbi to who is seen as a evil prophet, and somebody who is kind of a paradigmatic bad doer. And so, I mean, just the suggestion of a comparison is pretty powerful in its own right, to sort of say, oh, look, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon, who thought how great he was and how great his Torah learning was, but because of the way he acted, maybe he was acting a little bit more like Bilam, like the evildoer, than he would have liked to think. But there's actually significantly more to the comparison than that. So I'm going to turn to, and I'm actually have in front of me both the Gemara that we were learning and the Chumash Parsha Balak, which is chapter 22 in Bamidbar, in the book of Bamidbar, verse 15, Tet Vav, and take us through very quickly the story of Bilam as it's relevant, and kind of try to draw the connections in a more significant way. And then what I'm going to do is show how, up to a certain point, the point that we are in the story now, the Bilam and Elazar bar Shimon narratives are parallel one another extremely closely, really amazingly, in a way that I think could not have been unintentional from the Gemara's perspective in telling this story. But then we'll see that at the end they diverge from the point that we stopped in the Elazar bar Shimon story until the end, and from the Bilam story until the end, they diverge in a way that shows that the lessons that they learned from what happened to them were starkly different. And I think that we can see Rebbe Elazar bar Shimon as a redemptive figure at the end of the story, not only just because he realized he did something bad, oops, sorry, but that there's something really transformational that happened. So, if you look at verse 15 in Parsha Balak, Yosef od Balak shloach sarim rabim v'nechabdim ma'ela. So what's happening here is there's a king Balak who's trying to get Bilam, our prophet, our bad prophet, to go curse the Jewish people. And he starts sending messengers. He sends some. Bilam says, if God says I can say something bad, I'll say something bad. If God says something good, I'll say something good. It can't really move me. And then Balak sends some more messengers. Now they're even more important, more significant, greater in number. And they say to him in verse 16, Vayomru lo, Ko Amar Balak ben Tzipor. So says Balak the king, Al na timnem alecha elav, Eli. Don't hold back from coming to me on this journey. I will honor you greatly. And I want to draw that connection because, so we have the start of the story. Bilam is greatly honored to go on his journey, or in going on his journey. Here we had Elazar bar Shimon starting his journey, feeling very good about himself and all the great Torah learning that he had done and all the honor for himself. I'm going to skip down a little bit. They both agree to go on a journey, and then Balak in Parsha, in Pasuk Chaf Aleph 21, Vayakam Bilam baboker. So Bilam got up in the morning. Vayachbosh esno. He got his saddle, his donkey. Vayelech in Sari Moab. He went with the messengers of Moab. So now they're both going on the way, right? Elazar bar Shimon riding on his donkey, Bilam riding on his donkey. But in Chaf Beis, Vayitziat Seiv, and in 23 Chaf Gimel it says V'hu rochev alo snow, which, as I pointed out at the beginning, Rachuv ala chamor in the Elazar bar Shimon story. So the parallel there is direct. But back in verse 22, Vayitziat Seiv malach Hashem baderech, a angel of Hashem, a messenger of God, met him on the way. Okay, so now you got the two of them riding on their donkeys along the path. Elazar bar Shimon, nizdamen lo adam echad, right? He's met by a certain person. And on Bilam's part, v'yitzyatev malach Hashem baderech, he also meets somebody on the way. He meets the malach. So now they're both in the middle of their journey, their travels. Elazar bar Shimon returning from his studies, Bilam going to curse or bless the Jewish people, they both happen upon somebody. What happened? So Balak says, well, there's the twist with the Bilam story is that Bilam himself doesn't see the angel. Only his donkey sees the angel. So his donkey starts to bray and go, push him up against the side of the wall. He's scared of the angel. Bilam doesn't see it. So Bilam gets upset and he hits the donkey with his staff. Right? So similar sort of thing in that he meets somebody and then his anger flares. He does something wrong, some bad way of interacting or acting towards another. In the Elazar bar Shimon story, it's with the ugly man. In the Bilam story, it's with the donkey. He hits his donkey. Yiftach Hashem es pia ason. Hashem, God, opens the mouth of the donkey. The Tomer leBilam, the donkey says back to Bilam, Me'asisa lacha, ki hakisani zeh shalosh ogim. What did I do to you that you're hitting me 3 times? So just like the ugly man who is down on the totem pole as far as power and stature goes, but he speaks back to Elazar bar Shimon, points out to him, what are you doing? Why are you talking to me like that? How could you as a man of God do that? So to the donkey, God opens his mouth in order for him to tear into Bilam, to tell Bilam, what are you doing? What did I do to you that justifies your hitting me like this? And then he continues, Hello, Anochi Asoncha, Asher Achafcha Alai Me'otzcha Ad Hayom Hazeh. I'm your donkey that you've ridden, until this day. And so again, you've got the speaking back on both sides, and then just as Rav Elazar bar Shimon then realizes his sin, Vayagal Hashem es einei Bilam, Hashem opens up Bilam's eyes, he sees the Malach, realizes what he's done. Vayomer, this is in Lamed 34, Vayomer Bilam el Malach Hashem chatati. Bilam says to the Malach of Hashem, I have sinned. So you have both of them saying, after that moment or the realization of what they've done wrong, saying, chatati, I have sinned. Which is the parallelisms from start to finish. I won't repeat them all, but you've got like 8 or 9 things that line up exactly with these stories. So there's no question in my mind that the rabbis in the Gemara, when they were putting this Elazar bar Shimon story together, had Bilam in mind. So Bilam had his journey, his epiphanal moment, and his realization of his sin, and so too Elazar bar Shimon did. And they both really say something similar at the point that we had stopped, which is, just because you're a man of great stature and honor doesn't mean you can go and mistreat people, doesn't mean you can speak to them badly, you can hit them, you can, and both of them have that moment where they're spoken back to. You see, the donkey is also in a sort of comical in a certain sense, but you can't get more lowly than the donkey that Bilam is riding on, pointing out to him or showing him that his approach, which is this power-based approach, this sense of haughtiness, and not really realizing the impact and the hurt he's having on the lower people around him, is problematic. And both of them have that realization that's wrong. Okay, so you learn from that, a pretty powerful lesson about how one in power, how one who in a leadership position should act towards those around them, not to kind of get lost in that sense and forget the way that one has to interact with other people, and the sense of dignity that one has to treat others with, the proper propriety. And you see that they've both lowered themselves at the end in realizing what they did wrong. But there is where the stories depart. So the Bilam story, basically, after both of them have that moment when they say, Chatati, I've sinned, and then their journeys continue. Bilam's journey continues into the point when he sees the Jewish camp. Overlooking the Jewish camp, he gives them, tries to curse them, but he ends up blessing them. Elazar bar Shimon's story continues in a different way. Okay, so back in the Gemara, Chaf Amud Beis, in Masechet Tani, Amar Lo. So now Elazar Bashima has just said, Chatati, I've sinned. The man says to him, the ugly man says to him, Eina mochli lecha ad shetelech le'uman shasani v'omar lo v'emor lo kama mechor kli zeh shasani. He says, that's great that you said I'm sorry, but I'm not going to forgive you until you go to the craftsman that made you and say how ugly the thing is that you made. So the man, is not willing to forgive, and understandably so. I mean, Rabbi Shimon said just horribly insulting and mean thing a moment before, and just because he suddenly realized, oh shoot, that was really mean of me, the man's not ready to forgive and forget. So Hayamatal Achrav Achihil Iro. So Rabbi Elazar Shimon followed him the entire way until they got back to the city, begging for forgiveness. And in the Bilam story, it continues on, or the next verses are launched with Vayelech Bilam and Sari Balak, right? Yelech Matayel. So again, they both have their moment of realizing their sin, and then they go on with the rest of the journey. So Yatsa b'nei Ir Lakraso, the people of his city came out to meet him. By him being Elazar bar Shimon, the great rabbi. Hayu omrim lo shamalecha Rabbi Mori Mori. So they were running out to greet this great man. Nice to see you, Rabbi. And it's not coincidental that Shalom Alecha Rabbi, which is what the townspeople called Elazar bar Shimon, greeted him with exactly the same phrase that the exceedingly ugly man said to Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar when he met him. But here, the ugly man interjects. He doesn't know Elazar Shimon. He's sort of surprised by this greeting, this great fanfare for this man who's insulted him and has now followed him, the entire rest of the journey, begging him for forgiveness. So Amar lehem, Mia can call Rabbi. Who are you calling, Rabbi? Amru lo lazeh shemay acharecha, to that guy who's following after you. So Amar lahem, im zeh Rabbi al yirbu kumosu b'Yisrael. If this guy is a rabbi, this is a great rabbi, I don't want any others like him in Israel. There's a play on words here with Rabbi and Yarbu, but he's basically saying, and I think, people have this sentiment sometimes when rabbis are involved in scandal and other, doing things, just acting in ways that people shouldn't act in, let alone, rabbinic leaders. They say, if this is a rabbi, then I don't really want any part of this, this Jewish people. So Amru lo mipnei mas. They said, what? They didn't know the whole story. They say, townspeople said to him, well, why is that? Why are you saying that? And I think also that's kind of interesting insight into, the way that people sometimes interact or react to these kind of situations. They question the person who's come forward or who's been hurt. Say, well, why are you acting like that? Amar lahem, he says, kach b'kach asali. He said, well, that's what he did to me. Saw me on the road. I said hi, and he said, how ugly you are. Amru lo, they said to him, afal pichein mecholo. Well, even so, you should forgive him. She'adam gadol b'torahu, because he's a great rabbi. He's great in Torah. Amar lahem, so he says back to them, the ugly man says to the townspeople, bishvilchem hareini mocholo. For your sakes, I will forgive him. Ubilvad shelo yehei ragil asos kain. But only if this thing is not regularly done. So there's a sort of ambiguity here about as long as this is not a regular occurrence. And if you look at Rashi and Tosfos, the traditional commentators, they understand this line to mean as long as a Eliezer bar Shimon agrees not to regularly insult people. So the ugly man is saying that, okay, I'll forgive him because you're asking me to, as long as he agrees not to do it too often, not to too often say insulting things to people. Now, I find that and found that to be a very difficult interpretation, because it just doesn't really make a lot of sense that this guy who has been insulted to his face and has spent the entire rest of the journey telling Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon that he's not going to forgive him is suddenly going to be convinced, and then his condition is, as long as he doesn't insult people too often. I mean, how much is the right amount of time? How many times can Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon say hurtful, terrible things to people, and he's going to still be forgiven? I think that it's a problematic reading for me. And I think it's also a reading that reveals a certain approach, which is an Elazar bar Shimon focused approach, right? One way of reading the story is, who's the protagonist? This Elazar bar Shimon. He goes, he has the journey, he says something mean, he's kind of being like a cedar, which is all harsh, and he has his epiphany, and now he's a great guy, and he has his realization. But I don't actually think he's the protagonist in the story. I think the ugly man is the protagonist in the story. And I think what this actually means, with this line, the interpretation of the line that I think is correct, Amar lahem, he said to them, Bishvilchem hareini mochalo, for your sakes I will forgive him. Meaning, I don't know, I don't really want to forgive him. I mean, he's been horrible to me. If you think about it, this is probably somebody, the story says he's exceedingly ugly. So this is somebody who has probably suffered from insults and harsh, mean comments his entire life. So here's the, his one more person again being mean to him. It's really a lot to ask to say, forgive me, forgive him. But he says, you know what, for your sakes, because of the sake of the community, because, here they are, these people coming out, and this fight breaks out, basically. I mean, Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon is supposed to be, greeted with great fanfare. And here come the crowds, and there's this guy who starts, saying horrible things that he did to him on the road. And I bet you people didn't believe him. Some people did, and some didn't. The people were splitting up. Some taking Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon's side, maybe most. Some taking the anonymous ugly man side and standing up for him. And the people were starting to divide and to split. And so he says, for myself, I don't want to forgive him. For Elazar bar Shimon, I don't want to forgive him. But bishvilchem, for your sakes, for the sake of the community, for the sake of the town, for the sake of our possibility or ability to move forward together, I'm going to forgive. Ubilvad shelo yehi ragil lasos kain. But as long as this is not a regular occurrence. What's not a regular occurrence? Them asking him to forgive. Right? Because, their request, that's a big request. That's a big ask to say forgive when the forgiveness is not warranted. I mean, Rabbi Shimon didn't deserve forgiveness. He had said a horrible thing. And, he just because he then said, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to, or he didn't even say I didn't mean to. He just said, sorry, forgive me. He didn't deserve forgiveness. But what the ugly man says is that, it's too much to ask me to do this again and again. I've suffered these insults my whole life. So, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just going to keep saying, yes, I forgive this person who insulted me. I forgive that person who insulted me. And the next time it happens, I'm going to forgive again. But as long as you can tell me that you, the community, you, the people, can tell me you're not going to ask me to do this again and again, I can extend myself for the sake of reconciliation, for the sake of reconnection, for the sake of survival of the community, I'm going to say, I forgive you. And so, it's really a sort of transformational moment, because it's not, Rabbi Shimon did something bad and now he says, I'm sorry. Okay, that's good. But what is incredible, what's amazing, and what the story is building towards is this man who was suffered from the insults, but who, nevertheless, for the sake of continuity, for the sake of moving forward, for the sake of reconciliation, he's willing to say, I forgive him, even though he doesn't deserve it. And the amazing thing and the beautiful thing is that then the Gemara says, miyad, immediately after that, nichnas Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon v'darash. Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon entered and gave a drasha, gave a new interpretation. Olam yehei adam rach kekanav al yehei kashuk erez. For, a person should always be supple like a reed and not harsh and unbending like a cedar. So what is it? Why miyad? Why immediately after he saw that did he darshan? Did he do this new Torah teaching? It's because it was witnessing that act of forgiveness that inspired him to create and teach a new piece of Torah, right? Miyad nechnas v'darash. It was in that moment of seeing this person who forgave him when forgiveness wasn't warranted, that he was suddenly opened up the sort of well springs of Torah and of creativity. And it's not, if you remember the beginning of the story, Rabbi Elazar had come home haughty, traveled home haughty from all the Torah that he had learned in his rabbi's house, right? But it's not that Torah, the Torah that he had learned from his rabbi, that is the point and the conclusion of the story. The point of the story and what the story is building to is the new Torah that Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon creates and teaches in that moment, right? Because it's in living that moment, in living that reconciliation, in seeing the possibility of those two people to come together, and in seeing somebody who's gone beyond himself and Rabbi Shimon hadn't realized, hadn't recognized as possible, that he's inspired to teach this Torah. And what's the Torah that he teaches? It's a Torah that he's teaching, don't be like I was, ke'erez, harsh and inflexible. That's good, we knew that already. But be like that man, be like the Adam Machor, who is rach kekana, who's supple like a reed. Why? Because it's that man whose forgiveness is the suppleness, right? It's not just don't be harsh, but it's that he sees, or Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon sees this person who has, who has shown a certain ability for flexibility and for forgiveness that is so incredible to Rabbi Shimon. And it's amazing that it's the Torah that he learns, and others that Rabbi Shimon learns from that ugly man of no authority, no power, no stature, who he's met on the side of the road, but who teaches him how to act, how to be as a human being. That is what inspires him miyad, immediately, to teach and a new piece of Torah. And it's that paradigm shift, that Rabbi Elazar's new awareness of the possibilities of human behavior and reconciliation, that fuels and drives his new piece of Torah, this creative medrash about being supple like a reed. I've gone an hour and 10 minutes, but I have probably another 5 to 6 minutes left to sort of tie it all together. So I'm going to do that, and hope the folks can stick with me for another few minutes. So going back to the Bilam story, right? So we had talked about the Bilam story, the Elazar story seemed to have tracked very closely up until the moment that they both said chatati, they both said I've sinned. And then Rabbi Elazar has this whole second half where he has this reconciliation. And I want to suggest that's the difference between Rabbi Elazar and Bilam. And the reason that the rabbis created this parallelism wasn't only to tell us, look, this great rabbi was acting like Bilam, and there's a criticism in that, but also to show us the way that he then developed as a human being from that story that we don't see with Bilam. So, because how does the Bilam story end? We know how the Elazar Shimon story ends. It ends with this teaching, don't be like a cedar, be like a reed. But what's pretty cool is that Bilam's story ends with his blessing of the Jewish people. You should be like Arazim. You should be like the cedars on the side of the water. Now remember, that's the interpretation. That's what we started with as saying the bracha, the blessing that is sort of a blessing that's worse than a curse. It's a blessing that's not really a blessing. So what does that mean? Why is that? Why is his journey where he had that same experience of chatati, of realizing his wrong, end in that way, that he's saying, be like an Erez? I mean, he's literally saying the opposite lesson from Elazar Shimon. He's saying, I'm going to give you a blessing, Jewish people, be like a cedar. Elazar Shimon says the lesson is don't be like a cedar, be like a reed. It's because both of them came in the story at the beginning at the same place, with the same set of values in a certain sense. This valorization of power, honor, strength, right? They were coming from a world in which Elazar Shimon was a powerful figure, learning Torah, a great man, and he was feeling good about himself for that. And Bilam, too, was a man of honor. They were honoring him. The king was sending him as his messenger. And so they both were operating in this paradigm of kind of power and strength. So, but Bilam never really moves from that paradigm, right? So he has his realization, he's mean to the donkey, he hits the donkey, he sees the angel, he says chatati, but then when he gets to the end, he wants to give a blessing. What's his blessing? His blessing is be strong, be powerful. So his blessing, he's in a sense saying something good. I mean, he's saying to be something good, but his paradigm didn't shift. From the beginning to the end, he still sees that Erez, the power, the strength, the hardness as the ideal. But Elazar Bar Shimon has the paradigm shift. He has a whole new awareness because in his experience of the story, in Chatati and in interacting with that man and learning from him and seeing the reconciliation that's possible when somebody forgives when it's not warranted, he sees a whole new way of being. It's really a whole new understanding and awareness. And so, he is now a new person, a different person. And the lesson at the end is really, don't be like I was at the beginning, right? His character has developed in the character in the story, and his actual character, his traits have developed to the point where at the end he can teach. Don't be like a cedar. Don't valorize power and strength and honor like I did at the beginning, like I did when I started this journey. But his journey is really a journey of awareness and of re-understanding and of a new paradigm that he then comes out with at the end, internalizes really a whole new way of seeing and being the world. And finally, we have the last line of the Gemara, and which I said at the beginning we were going to return to. So now we've said Elazar Shimon has his new awareness. He and I guess I should say too, I think that lesson is a powerful lesson. I mean, maybe it's obvious, but just to sort of set it out explicitly. The lesson is not only that if you're sort of don't be a haughty person and realize that and think you're so great and talk down to and be mean to people of lesser stature or people who have physical differences or any of that, but it's really a moving testament to the possibility of reconciliation and the possibility for a kind of new awareness and understanding, the possibility for one to extend oneself, and in doing so, to create a connection and a relationship that and further a relationship that that seems so broken. So I hope that that's a lesson too to us about the possibilities. Sometimes we seem in our relationships to be a place where there's no way to move forward from them. But I hope that the story can show us that sometimes in one person forgiving when it's not warranted, and the other person being moved by that act of forgiveness, that we can shift our paradigms, not only in the way we look at things, but in the way we interact with other people in our lives. And so that final note from the Gemara, so we have that whole thing. He teaches his lesson, and then the Gemara says, "Ulaficha," and therefore, "Zacha kane lito hemena kulmos." So therefore, the reed merited for the quill to be made from it, the lichtov bo sefer Torah, tefillin, and mezuzos, and to be written with it, the sefer Torah, the tefillin, and the mezuzos, the ritual objects. And I think there's something powerful here too, because if you remember at the beginning of the story, there was a similar line saying kind of reeds are good because the Torah is written with them too. But here with the word lefichach, and therefore, it's connecting the story that we just had and Rabbi Elazar bar Shimon's realization to the physical objects of the Torah. Therefore, because of this teaching that a person should be supple like a reed and not hard and harsh like a cedar, it's for that reason. In other words, to teach us that, to remind us of that the Sefer Torah and the Tefillin and the Mezuzahs are written with a quill, with a reed, with a supple object. And I think the lesson of that really, or the meaning of that, is that it's supposed to signal that every time we open the Torah scroll, put on tefillin, kiss the mezuzah, we're reminded that the Torah is not created with harshness, with power, with valorization of honor, with difficulty, right? Kasha, ke'erez, inflexibility, or hardness of the cedar, but with and from the love and understanding, flexibility, softness, and creative potential of the reed. And so, and also with the possibility, which we saw from Elazar bar Shimon, of creativity and of being renewed with new understandings, new teachings that react to our lives and the human condition, not inflexibly, but that see our lives around us, and that then generate new teachings, right? Miyad darash, that as soon as the Elazar bar Shimon saw this, he was able to teach a new Torah. So I think the lesson really of the Leficha is that as we interact with those physical objects of the Torah, that the object itself, the Sefer Torah, the Torah scroll, the mezuzah, the tefillin, we're supposed to look at and touch and see and think about and remember this story, the story of Elazar bar Shimon, the story of the potential for reconciliation and for creative renewal of the Torah. And so, and to distance ourselves from and make sure that we don't adopt the attitude that Rabbi Shimon started with, from the harsh ke'erez, the possibility or the hardness and harshness, the inflexibility of the cedar, and that we think of ourselves and we become the children of the rabbis who don't sadly judge people for their outward appearance and judge them at first sight as worthless or as ugly or as not valuable, but instead see in people the possibility of learning, the possibility of learning from those people that we meet on the road, no matter their stature or their station, and that so the Torah itself is in a physical way incorporated and incorporates these lessons of that we've talked about, and that is the lesson of the read. That's the meaning of the read. And so finally, and really finally this time, I wanted to bring it all the way back to the beginning. If you remember that we started off with the verses from Eicha, from the Book of Mourning, that compared Yerushalayim, Israel, to the Nida, the menstruating woman, and the Almana, the widow. And we said that hints to, or that the Gemara read those Lebracha, read those positively as a suggestion of the possibility of return, and the possibility and the promise of a return to Yerushalayim. And so I think that the full circle of this story, because we went from there to the Jewish people bouncing back like a reed, and then to us as individuals, and our incorporating those notions and kind of becoming the people on an individual level who are reed-like, that the idea and the completion of the idea of this sugya is that we take it back to the top of the Yerushalayim, and especially considering where we are in the Jewish calendar, the weeks of comfort, that the reconciliation with God Himself and the return to Yerushalayim is accomplished through this kind of loving forgiveness and the belief in the possibility of reconciliation, so that whatever has happened to us, not only with people that we hope to reconcile with, but also with God Himself, whether it's in our personal lives or from a historical perspective, there are a lot of things that have happened that we could look back and say, how did you do that to us? And people have said that, and people have lived through the most horrific circumstances and have asked those questions. But I think the only way that, like the couple who are reunited after the Nida, or the wife who is waiting longingly for her husband to return from the long journey, the only way that we can fully reconcile, if we have harsh questions to ask of God Himself, is to some extent to forgive, even if it's not warranted, in the hope that that will bring a reconciliation and a reconnection and a return after a long time apart, and that hopefully we will live out the promise of Yerushalayim Kenida, that at the end of that whole time, those 2,000 years, there will be a return and a celebration of our reconnection. So thank you very much for joining me for this first monthly Agadata class, and I hope to see you next month. If you have questions about what we've studied or want to discuss it, please feel free to reach out to me on Facebook or YouTube. Tell your friends, and I hope to see you next month. Thank you.